The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Just an absolutely massive thank you to Neil Rochlani for picking up the slack on yesterday's podcast. I am Dan Besbris. This is Fantasy NBA Today. I know things got flip-flopped on you, but I ran into some issues on Wednesday that prevented me from getting that podcast done. Neil jumped in and fired off a fantastic show on a whim, on a moment's notice. As I texted to him, Neil, you are a king among peasants. So thank you once again for picking up the slack. Welcome to the podcast, everybody. I'm Dan Besbris. I said that a moment ago. At Dan Besbris on Twitter. If you want to give me a follow, you can follow the co-hosts here on Fantasy NBA Today at Ball with Neil and at Adrian Benjamins. As I promised back on Monday's podcast, when you get solo shows of me, you will be getting sports betting stuff for the foreseeable future because honestly, it takes a while to break down each team, and I hope that you guys are taking something away from this beyond just, hey, this is a team that I like or don't like. It's handicapping, right? This podcast, it's why I took a lot of pride in the sports betting show that I used to run many years ago now. It's not just about getting a winner, because any tout, well, literally any human, any monkey with a telephone can tell you who to bet on and tell you, well, this is why it's going to win. They're 6-4, ATS last 10, they're on a 20-15 run. All that type of stuff is just grand, but it's all bunk. The point of a sports betting podcast, and right now that's what this show is when I'm doing my solo pods, is to try to give you a little insight on how to arrive at that conclusion. And I hope that we do that on the fantasy side as well. As you listen to this podcast, I want you guys to be getting better at whatever it is that we're talking about, whether it's, the fantasy grind during the season, whether it's season in review when we look at how all the teams performed and what we could learn from it, or right now, whether it's season win totals, which came out last week, and we're sort of slowly pouring our way through them. Neil's been doing his own part in this degenerate exhibition we've got going on over here. For those of you that listen to the Monday pod, you already know what I'm about to say, but we went over the first three teams alphabetically, the Hawks, the Celtics, and the Nets. This is by city, of course, Atlanta, Boston, and Brooklyn. We were able to cover three teams. My goal for today's show is to hit on the next six, but we'll see how far we get. Because as I learned on that Monday podcast, I thought I was going to be able to do 5, and I think it took me about 20 minutes just to do 3. So we shall see. If it's like 7 minutes a team, we might cut it off after 5. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, as I do on every podcast these days, I want to remind everybody we've got the Hoop Ball Leagues. They are continuing to fill up. Now it's more of a steady trickle. This is like late in free agency. We had that big burst right out of the chute. We've got 3 cash leagues. We've got 5 free leagues. We have 2 dynasty leagues. Dynasty leagues are both full, by the way. We've got a pretty sizable wait list for those as well. But we will continue to take applications for the cash and free head-to-head leagues and the cash and free roto leagues up until draft day. So you do still have close to 2 months, a little bit less than that now. Every week we'll do a recap on that stuff. And if you'd like to get involved in these Hoop Ball listener and reader leagues, by the way, there are also Hoop Ball pros interspersed. You might have one in your league and you wouldn't even know it unless they announced it to you. We're not going to tell you. 2 ways to do it. That's what I was talking about. Go to the Hoop Ball forums. Check out the Hoop Ball listener leagues thread, reader and listener leagues thread. Post your name, get you an email address, and Neil will handle placement. Or you can tweet at us. That's probably the fastest way if you're, savvy. Probably on Twitter already. It might have even been where you got the alert that this podcast had come out. Make sure to follow myself at Dan Besbris, Neil at Ball with Neil. Tweet at us. Let us know what kind of league you'd like to get in. Make sure you're following each of us so that we can direct message, and we'll get you placed in one of those leagues as well. Okay, that's all I want to do on the logistical side. Let's get into the sports betting stuff. This is fun for me. This is kind of like a blast for the past. Charlotte is the next one on the list as we work our way through alphabetically. The line on the Hornets is 35.5. Well, let's go through this thing the way we go through all of them. Last year, the Charlotte Hornets, I took the under, and I felt pretty good about it, and it hit. Charlotte managed 36 wins. They went under by, I think, 1.5, so it was close, but not that close. Close, but not that close. And my reasoning last year was that Charlotte had signed or traded for, honestly, at this point, I don't remember how it happened, Dwight Howard. And I've been pushing the theory now for a couple of years that any team that gets Dwight Howard immediately becomes a worse basketball team. And they did. He's a paint clogger. He doesn't run the offense the way that he should, right? He should just be running pick and roll. Should have his entire career, but he insists on banging into people in the post, cuts down driving lanes for guys like Kemba Walker and Nick Batum, cuts down rebounding ability for guys like Marvin Williams, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. Basically, it slows things down. When guys like Marvin Williams get a rebound, they're quicker at finding the pass. They're quicker back up to the rim than Dwight as he's gotten older. Now, for all intents and purposes, Dwight Howard had probably the best year we could have ever envisioned out of him in Charlotte, and I still felt like he made them a worse team. Yes, some of this is Lakers sour grapes. Yeah, some of it is. But at the same time, we've watched him bounce from team to team, and everywhere he's gone, it's just been messy. By the way, file this segment aside for when we get to the Wizards later this year. For now, the Hornets are without Dwight Howard. They had 36 wins and 46 losses at the end of last season, and their line this year is 35.5, which, unfortunate, right? They just put it right on that same number. Now, given my usual logic, I would roll into this thing and say, well, look, they had 36 wins, they lost Dwight Howard. That's probably going to help them to 37. Here's my fear with the Charlotte Hornets, and it's why I can't go full bore into this over. I do, by the way, lean to the over. That's the side that I would pick. It's a Dwight Howard play. But I'm also concerned that if something goes wrong early in the season, if they get off to a slow start, if Kemba Walker gets injured, if Nick Batum gets injured, one of those key pieces goes down, and they sort of sputter their way through October and November, there's a very real possibility that they blow it up. And that is why I just don't have the massive confidence in this that I could if I didn't think there was a chance of them unloading assets. They have Kemba Walker on an unbelievably team-friendly deal. They could get a boatload for someone like that. Do they want to? No, they don't want to. They'd rather be, decent. And frankly, if Cody Zeller can stay healthy, this team had the makings of a club on the upswing the previous year. They had been making small strides basically every season. And then last year, the whole thing just came apart. So Dwight Howard, the health of Nick Batum, all that stuff just didn't go right. They looked okay. They look okay on paper. They should have some more operating room from a fantasy standpoint. The guys that were just all disasters this year, all those guys that I said, don't touch them. You can go back and listen to last year's podcast from right around this time of year. I said Kemba Walker was the only Hornet I would trust because he's the only Hornet whose game was not strictly predicated on doing something near the bucket, on getting a rebound or two or three, orchestrating, moving the basketball. He could get his because he's Kemba. But Batum, you knew that rebounding number was going to come down. Cody Zeller, obviously, as the backup. There was no hope there. Marvin Williams, whose game was all rebounding and threes and efficiency. Well, you take away one of those three things, he becomes a much less interesting fantasy player. all of those guys now can bounce back this year. There's a lot of guys that are going to be undervalued because of the Dwight Howard effect from previous seasons. But that's the fantasy side. My hope here with Charlotte is that they come into the season healthy. They can go back to the offense that was pretty successful the previous season with Cody Zeller running. A guy like Frank Kaminsky can come off the bench to spread the floor a little bit. I hope we don't see too much Bismack Biyombo because he's terrible. He's not really an NBA caliber player. But then you got Kemba, you got Batum, you got Marvin, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, I guess. At least that's something. He's a solid defender, if not much else. And in a weak East, there's an opportunity. So the Charlotte Hornets this year, very slight lean to the over. That could become a more significant lean if they get off to a half-decent start, right? Like, if we don't see this thing coming apart and they don't look like they're going to sell off pieces, then this one could turn out to be a pretty easy one. The Chicago Bulls, that's one we've actually talked about a little bit on this podcast before. It was actually before I had handicapped the team, and it was one that I talked about with Neil Rochlani. And Neil brought it up as one that kind of frightened him a little bit, and rightfully so. The Chicago Bulls are listed at 27.5. Last year, the Bulls won 27 games. This one feels too easy. And that is, without question, the thing that pulls us back a little bit. Sometimes those ones that look too easy, they don't pan out. But in that weak East, this team simply has too much talent to not get back to where they were last season. And think about everything else. They really didn't play their guys the last month of the year. The Bulls went into tank mode themselves. Zach LaVine didn't play. Chris Dunn might have played, but he appeared to actually be significantly hurt. They sat Justin Holiday. They sat Robin Lopez. They were running some pretty janky lineups out there. They absolutely crushed the over 22.5, so we won our bet last season. And yes, I do believe Nico Mirotic had at least a decent amount to do with them rattling off a strong month of January. But there's sort of more to it than just that. They have pieces in Chicago. They have Chris Dunn. They have Zach LaVine. They brought in Jabari Parker, who, again, for all of his issues, he's better than... Well, I don't even know that it's true. All right, they have Jabari Parker. They also have Denzel Valentine. 6 to 1, half dozen, I guess. Denzel a little bit better from the perimeter. Jabari Parker a little better as he gets a little closer to the rim. They have Lauri Markkanen, who should continue to improve. So they have 3 young guys that could all be pretty good this year. They have Robin Lopez. He's still around, and I hope that they'll play him for most of the year this season. They still have Justin Holiday. They have Bobby Portis, who I don't really much care for, but he's there. They have legitimately, as I list off all of those names, they have legitimately about 8 guys that you could argue belong in the NBA, and not every team can claim that. From a fantasy perspective, that's a whole different ball game, but from a reality perspective, there are just guys that can score and do stuff on this team, and they're going to get out and they're going to play some street ball stuff, and when games get ugly, teams that can score tend to do pretty well. Do I think that they're going to make these big strides and get to 35 wins? Hell no. They're not going to play nearly enough defense to get to that mark. But as I've said before, it's very hard to lose more than 57 games, really. And in this one, they'd have to lose, what are we at, 55? That's a lot of losses for a team that has ability. Right? Like, there's some pretty awful teams that still get to 24, 25 wins. This is a team that's not awful. They're just not. If they stay remotely healthy, this is a number they should get to. I know it seems easy, and I know sometimes when things seem too easy, that's when we lean the other direction. But I'm not going to talk myself out of this one when I know that these guys on the Bulls, if they play to their potential, they should hit this mark. 2 other things that I want to mention on this Bulls situation. I don't see them going into mega tank mode again this year. We've talked about it before. The 3 worst records in the NBA are all going to have an equal shot at that number 1 pick. The Bulls would have to tank real hard, in my estimation, to be one of the 3 worst teams in the NBA. That's not to say that their number isn't basically saying they are one of the 3 worst teams in the NBA, right? Like, these win totals do have them in that grouping. But I think they could just play their hearts out and still be in kind of that bottom 5. And if they lose a couple games down the stretch, I still think they get to that 28. Like Phoenix, their number's 2 higher than Chicago this year. That's a big leap for a team that's shown no improvement. I know they brought in Ariza and they drafted Ayton, but goodness. Sacramento and Atlanta, by the way, are the only 2 teams with lower win projection marks than the Chicago Bulls. So they are projected to be one of the 3 worst teams. I don't see it. I don't think they're going to be. And on the other side of this, the reason that I think maybe this feels too easy is that I think people didn't realize that the key cogs for the Bulls last year didn't play. Right? Like, look at the list of games played from last season as we pour our way through these numbers. Go to your Chicago Bulls and pull up their roster and look at who played how many games last year. Chris Dunn, 52. He missed 30 games last season. A lot of them on the front end, but some on the back end as well. Zach LaVine, 24 games last year. Brutal shooting percentage, by the way. He should be able to come back somewhere near where he was in previous seasons. 24, guys. This is a dude that could end up being their best player. Lauri Markkanen actually played most of the season, but even he missed 14 games. He played 68 games last year. Like, even a modicum of health on this club, and they get to that 28-win mark. Now, if everybody gets hurt, well, we're up a creek. That's a risk you take betting any over in NBA season win totals, because you got your money, you got that outlay forever. So a lot of things can go wrong. Very few things can actually go right for a team other than actually getting a win and staying healthy. It's why, in general, you should start with the under, and you have to kind of talk yourself into the over mark. All right, let's keep moving along. We're like 14, 15 minutes in, and we've only done 2 teams, as usual. Third team on the docket for today's show, the Cleveland Cavaliers, over 30.5. Yes, I am starting right out of the chute with how I feel on this one. This was one of the easiest ones for me to handicap, and darn it, I'm sure I'm going to end up being wrong come April, whatever, last day of the regular season. But you would have to really talk me out of betting an over on a team that just lost the best player in the NBA. It is the ultimate in monetary overreactions. This is a simple one. And you could go through all the individual stats and players and come up with a series of reasonings why you want to go the over. And we'll do that here on this podcast. But you don't have to. You don't have to. When a team loses the best player in the world, the number is going to shift hard. The Cleveland Cavaliers won 50 games last year, which, by the way, was well under the mark that they were supposed to hit. I whiffed on that one. LeBron had the best season of his career, probably, and they went way under. Isaiah Thomas didn't pan out at all. I thought he would be a factor. He never got healthy. Kevin Love missed his standard X amount of time, and they just didn't play any defense. But they still won 50 games, and a lot of that was LeBron. But by most metrics, LeBron James has been graded out to be worth about 15 wins, which is freaking nuts when you think about it. The addition of one player to your basketball team can swing them 15 victories, but that would leave them at 35 if you drop that 50 down to 35. That's still 4.5 wins over this mark. Odds makers are well aware that there's going to be a monetary overreaction to LeBron James leaving town. They knew they had to set this line low because everybody and their mother is going to be looking at this situation and saying, well, LeBron is gone. This is an under. We don't feel that way. This is much like I mean, it's different, obviously, because in Indiana they got Victor Oladipo back. But when a team loses a high-profile guy, they tend to respond. In fact, I think we would have won our Clippers bet if anybody on that damn team stays healthy, especially Patrick Beverley. If they had any measure of health, they would have gone over last year with Chris Paul leaving town. Those are, to me, some of the easiest things to handicap because you start on a particular side and you just look to make sure everything kind of adds up in that direction. And here it really does. The biggest fear, I think, that any of us would have had betting an over on the Cleveland Cavaliers was the idea that they might try to go into tank mode, that they would blow it up, much like we talked about with the Charlotte Hornets. But unlike in Charlotte, where most of their well-paid guys are closer to the end of their contracts, although I guess Batum still has a couple years left, but Kemba's almost done, and he's going to be due a big increase. The Cleveland Cavaliers just went out and gave Kevin Love a massive contract extension. Said, look, we don't want to go into a full rebuild. Stick around here for the next half decade. We'll pay you handsomely. It was a glorious turn of events because it solidified his fantasy value, and it also made us look at this team and said, look, they don't want to lose. They want to grind their way to the number 8 seed in the Eastern Conference. They want to get to that 39-win plateau or whatever it might take this season to get in there. The Pistons had 39. The Wizards had 48, or 43, excuse me. So it would have taken a few more wins. I don't think the Cavs make the playoffs out east, but they do. And that's really all that matters. They think they're going to make it. They want to make it. So they paid Kevin Love. They've still got old guys coming out of their ears. They still got Kyle Korver. They've got George Hill. They've got J.R. Smith. They've got Tristan Thompson. Do they try to move some of these guys? Maybe. They might try to shift them around a little bit, see if they could clear out a little room. Colin Sexton is the new guy in town. They got a nice early draft pick. Start working on things in Cleveland. They have Larry Nance, who's not an old guy. Jordan Clarkson will probably play a little bit more this year, but he has shown himself to be kind of a one-trick pony. Still, I think George Hill is better than what we saw most of last season. I think Larry Nance is a solid contributor. Tristan Thompson can still do, a handful of things on a basketball court. J.R. Smith is not the worst player in the universe, except for the last few seconds of a critical playoff game. There are still pieces on this Cavaliers team, many of them veteran pieces, that don't really have tank in their eyes. So they're going to go out there and they're going to try to burn their way to a few victories. And if you're trying, and if you're not a rookie that just doesn't understand the speed of the game, you can get to 30 wins in the NBA, especially out east. I mean, the Knicks had 29 wins last year, and they were horrendous for long stretches. So I like the Cavs over, and of all the bets that we've talked about on this show so far, that's probably the one that I like the most. Crazy though it may be. I wouldn't be surprised to see that team get to 33, 34 wins and clear the over with about 2 weeks to go in the regular season. I like this one. Overs are stressful, too, because you're out of the money until they finally hit that part. Unders, you've won your bet the whole year until they do everything right and get out of it. Unders are easier. You certainly feel better about them longer. And I don't know that the Cavs are necessarily going to get off to a great start, but what I will say is that teams are going to take them a little bit more lightly without LeBron James in town. They're going to steal a few surprise wins, and I think you're going to see a hell of a year from Kevin Love. Hell of a year. Okay, let's keep rumbling along. Next team on the docket, the Dallas Mavericks. And it's interesting juxtaposition here, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the team that I felt I had the strongest feelings on so far, of anybody we've talked about to this point. The Mavs, I have the weakest feeling of anybody so far. In fact, I listed them on a document that I'm writing up that I'll put out when I've done all 30 teams as a confidence of 0. This is on a scale from 1 to 5, by the way. I had to create a 0 because I just hate this number. I hate everything about it. I hate the team, frankly, and I hate the number. We talked about it on a podcast, I believe it was on Monday's show, actually. But the Mavericks won 24 games this year, but they actually played more like a team that should have won 30. But expert in-game tanking strategy by Mark Cuban and Rick Carlisle allowed them to lose a lot of close games. The one that pops into my head is that game in Los Angeles. They were playing the Lakers, and it was tight. It's a tight ball game, and the Mavericks just went to like 5 G-Leaguers for the first 8 minutes of the fourth quarter and crapped the game away on purpose, very clearly. They put the starters in for a minute or two, kind of a cursory, hey, you guys still here? But they didn't want that game. They tried to lose it in the middle of the ball game after they'd been playing well. They benched Dennis Smith Jr. during games where he was playing well. They did all those little tweaks in the game. So you never actually saw guys sitting it out necessarily. They didn't just rest everybody for the final month of the year. They were much more covert about it. And Lord knows we knew they were doing it. Mark Cuban had said tanking is the best way to try to rebuild your basketball team. He got fined for saying so. And then his team was brilliant at tanking. They only had a point differential of minus 2.7, which, as we've mentioned before, is way better than the teams down at the bottom of the standings where they were huddled. In fact, it kind of put them in their own weird little ballpark. The Lakers were at minus 1.4, and then the next team was the Knicks at minus 3.5. By the way, the Knicks won 29 games at minus 3.5. The Mavericks should, as we mentioned, they should have won more like 30 or 31 last year if they just played those games out with their normal rotations. But they didn't, and they did it on purpose. So, what are they doing now? Well, the Mavericks brought in DeAndre Jordan. This odd move, but they have needed somebody to go get a rebound. I think he'll play pretty hard this year because, well, frankly, DJ, he's probably not going to have that many opportunities to get another contract. This is a 1-year deal, and he's going to want to make some coin. So he plays hard. You'll see some growth from Dennis Smith Jr. The Mavs managed to turn their tanking into Luka Doncic, which is a pretty sweet deal. I don't know what his contributions are going to be rookie season, but I'm betting there'll be some. They have Harrison Barnes, who feels like he's been in the NBA for 25 years, but he's not that old yet. They have Wesley Matthews and Dirk Nowitzki, who are terribly old, and then they've got this weird mishmash of younger guys that are either moderately skilled to not skilled, somewhere in between. It's a strange roster. They still have J.J. Barea on there. He's been in the NBA for a dozen years. Dirk, by the way, congratulations. He's been in the NBA for 20 seasons now. They brought Devin Harris back in, who's actually shown himself to be a pretty good basketball player late in his career. Maxi Kleber showed some stuff. Dorian Finney-Smith, Dwight Powell. So they have some pieces, which puts us in this odd little conundrum. Can they go from a team that won 24 games last year to a team that can win, 34 and a half? That's a monster of a switch. That's an 11-point jump from a team that brought in one basketball player in the offseason, DeAndre Jordan, and they drafted Doncic. Fine. Otherwise, this team's makeup is basically the same. So this is a confusing line from odds makers. The question we do need to be asking ourselves, though, is not whether or not this team can improve by 11 games, but whether they can improve by 4 or 5. And the answer is a distinct maybe. And it's why I feel very wishy-washy on this Mavericks number, because it is obscenely high. And the obvious play would be to say, what, are you kidding me? 24-win team adds DeAndre Jordan and improves by 11 victories? But if they're not in tank mode, if they're not purposely losing all those games late in the year, and those 5 or 6 losses become wins, we're talking about a team now that playing hard, some improvement, addition of DeAndre Jordan, and it needs to improve from 31 to 35 wins. So it's a 4-win jump. I still believe the answer is no, but barely. No, but barely. I think you see this team get to about 34 wins. It feels like a club like last year where maybe like the Pistons, you're talking about a team that can go over with a win on the last day of the regular season, Much like the Pistons, they probably won't be in the bottom 3 teams, so there will be no reason to tank for them, so they'll just sort of fall into that last win, which makes me say maybe we should go over and say they actually hit 35, but I have just the tiniest lean to the under. I think they hit 34. But make no mistake, this is a zero confidence wager. I hope that I have accurately kind of elucidated here why I believe this number is not nearly as crazy as it appears. You look at that 34.5, and I think the first thing that jumps out is, my God, that is a huge leap season over season. But as we've now been able to demonstrate, to draw this picture, it's just not as crazy as it looks. All right, last team on today's show. I thought we might not get to 6. We're going to do 5. The Denver Nuggets. Back to the well, ladies and gentlemen. Denver Nuggets, we had over 45.5 last year. They just barely got to 46, despite Paul Millsap missing 3 months of last season. That's a team that would have easily cleared the 45.5 last year had they been healthy. I mean, there were guys that were out pretty much all season long. We're going to go back to the well. We're going to say over 47.5, and the reasons are, well, pretty straightforward. This is a situation where we're not overthinking it. Yes, the West probably got tougher, you would argue, but the Nuggets have a few advantages that you can never take away from this team. Number one, they play at altitude, which means they are almost always going to be at least a decent home team, if not a very good one. It's not always the case. It's not, as simple as A and B kind of thing. But teams go into that place on a back-to-back. Denver has an opportunity to steal some wins. They have an edge that will never come away. Simple as that. On top of that, they have a core of young guys that are all very good, none of whom, I would argue, are getting worse. Paul Millsap is the only Nugget that's getting worse on a season-by-season basis. Everybody else is getting better. Nikola Jokic, 3 years in the league. Monster. Will Barton, continuing to improve. Jamal Murray, continuing to improve. Gary Harris, continuing to improve. Trey Lyles, you could throw him into the mix. Malik Beasley, not going to play a ton, but getting better. Torrey Craig, they like him. I love Gary Harris, by the way. To me, he's the most underrated Nugget. They signed Isaiah Thomas to a crazy cheap deal, which, again, kind of sucks for IT, but he's going to have something to prove this year. He wants one more contract. And when I say one more, I mean, one. Finally get a contract that's worth writing home about a little bit. What a tough road for poor IT. But he's going to play with a chip on his shoulder. And having a little depth, having a guy that can score like that off the bench, that's a big deal. I think Paul Millsap likely stays a little healthier this year. I don't know that he plays 80 games, but I don't think he misses 3 months. That's half the season. That's half the year. So give me this young core getting 2 wins better. That feels pretty doable. It's never easy because you hit a certain point, especially in the Western Conference, where getting up and over that 50-win threshold is crazy tough. That's why only 2 teams were able to do it last year. The Rockets and the Warriors. And then you got everybody else that's just whomping on each other. It's like these power conferences in college basketball. How do you get to 50 wins when everybody you're playing is so good? Well, here's the thing. Great. The young core for the Nuggets continues to get better. That's an easy one. Everybody can look at that and talk about how it factors into going from 46 to now what we'd need to be 48 wins. But I think the biggest part of this Nuggets over, the thing that makes me feel the most confident about it, is how close they came last year. How they biffed their way. A couple of easy losses they should have been able to avoid. And they'd have been in the playoffs. Missed it by that much. The last game of the regular season, they got outplayed by the Timberwolves, and the Wolves snuck in The Nuggets did not. The Nuggets are going to be coming into this NBA season understanding that every victory, every game, especially early in the year when everybody else is settling in, it all matters. They've had very little roster turnover. I know we talked about Isaiah Thomas coming in, but overall the Nuggets are the same general team. They know how to play with one another. They understand rotations. They understand assignments. They understand offensive flow. This is a team that should be able to get off to a pretty quick start. They do need to improve their defense. It wasn't good last year. Wasn't good enough. That's for damn sure. But I don't know, man. Look at some of those teams. Blazers to me got worse. Clippers got worse. They're behind the Nuggets. Lakers got better. The West isn't getting any easier, but the Nuggets know they're going to have to get to 48 wins to make the playoffs. I think that's what they have to assume, because last year 47 made it in, and there's no reason to think that any of those top 8 teams have fewer than 47 wins this year. Maybe the Portland Trail Blazers, but the Nuggets are knowing they're going to be dealing with LeBron for that spot. Do the Spurs fall back? I don't know. They got DeRozan in town now. The Jazz, the Pels, the Thunder, they all, to me, got better. Or stayed the same. Rockets got worse. Warriors, better, same, whatever. All 5 of those teams, to me, are locked into 48 or more wins. So the Nuggets know they're going to have to get there. And that gives me a great deal of confidence in saying, I think they're going to work hard early. I think they're going to try to rack up 15, 20 wins early in the season. So that way, when they inevitably hit some kind of skid and somebody gets hurt, they're still on pace to get there. So give me that Nuggets over with some measure of confidence, and let's hope they get off to a quick start, because that's a big part of our handicap. All right, that's what we'll put a pin in it. We'll start next solo show. That'll be Monday for me with the Detroit Pistons. 37.5. That's the next one on the docket. We are, 8 teams out of 30 into this thing, so we got a long way to go, folks. Fear not. Dan's solo gambling pods will continue. Tomorrow, the week wraps up here on Fantasy NBA Today. Adrian and Neil, where are they going next? I'm excited to find out. They finished up their conference-by-conference breakdown of the NBA, but I know they've got something up their sleeves. We're in a time of the year now where news is starting to happen, not so much on the fantasy news breaking style, but just in how we approach the fantasy NBA season. And the betting NBA season. It's a good time of year. And I think people are paying attention again, too. Pretty cool. All right, thanks for listening, folks. I am Dan Besbris. Again, thank you to Neil for picking up the slack and handling that Wednesday pod. This is the Thursday edition. So, with that, I do wish you all a lovely Thursday. A lovely Thursday, August the 16th. I don't know that anything's going on, so it's not like I can tell you what you need to pay attention to. Adrian and Neil wrapping things up tomorrow, and then I'll be back with you on Monday here on Fantasy NBA Today. This is a hoop ball presentation. I don't think I ever said that. Go to hoop-ball.com, check it all out, have some fun, and learn a thing or two. A lesson to be learned, as Aaron Brewski's old tweet said. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.